Victoria 3 has got a new patch update, and whether you're playing it now, live, in the beta version on Steam, or you're awaiting the full release on Monday, June 26th, let's talk about what update 1.3.5 brings, one that they call bigger than one of their usual post-release patches, and I think for very good reason. So sit back and relax, and let's take a look at what's changing in Victoria 3's latest patch update. And it's actually a double whammy. There are some significant changes for Voice of the People, based largely actually, or a lot of them anyway, around community feedback, but there are also some base game updates, and we're going to do them in reverse order from the dev diary and start with the base game, the free updates that'll be rolling out in this patch. There are three things that they've improved that they've outlined as sort of the three most important things, and then there's a longer list of changes. I won't go through every single thing, but we should start definitely with the three big ones. Firstly, we can selectively demobilize a general as long as at least 6 months has passed since they were mobilized. Now, doing so will immediately demobilize them and cut off their goods consumption, but the budget that you've allocated will be reduced gradually over the next 4 months, kind of signifying that it doesn't just happen instantaneously, but that there's sort of a gradual cost to withdrawal. Their second main point was to mention that they've made some improvements to unifications, which we'll talk about later in the video. They've also improved the new industry banned law to make it more relevant and changed interest group traits to deactivate at a different approval level. Then they activate to cut down on notification spam. Any cut down on notification spam is good news as far as I'm concerned. In the process, they also made it possible for modders to change interest group traits through events, opening up possibilities for unique traits for different countries and cultures. On performance, late game is a big priority for the community and the developers, they say, and they're working on it continuously. Among other things, they've added a pop consolidation game rule to let us customize the amount by which we want our smaller pops to merge as the game goes on. Thus, of course, ultimately, making it easier to run Victoria 3 requires less performance power because it's not tracking so many small population groups. They say that we can feel free to try it out, let them know how effective it is in resolving performance concerns, i.e. does it make the late game perform better, faster, smoother. It's not the only thing that they've done to improve performance, they say, and they'll continue to work on it to ensure that the end game is more pleasurable than it currently is. Now let's take a look at each category, and in this one, in the improvements one, I'd like to highlight specifically, of course you'll have the full notes on screen and below, the changes around unification, because they highlighted that those were pretty important. So we can see here that unification plays now target all countries that hold states that are relevant for unification, and are not supporters, allies, or subjects of the initiator. Furthermore, unification plays will no longer target disqualified candidates, but can target great powers. So Italian unification can tend to target Austria for Lombardy, and German unification will tend to target France. Unification plays now spawn individual war goals as well for each relevant state instead of just one umbrella goal, and when a player is launched, all supporters of the initiator are annexed by the initiator. Pretty significant. The opposing side in unification play now also gets the cut down to size war goal against the initiator. So much more significant role. And outside of that, you can see broader improvements around petitions, demobilizing generals, which we've already talked about, and a journal entry or two, particularly around Haiti and cancelling its French indemnities in said war entries. So overall changes to unification are the key highlights out of the improvements section, I would argue. As far as the interface improvements go, as you can see, they're largely sort of small quality of life improvements across a few areas. For example, they've added the political movement an agitator will support or join when they're invited to the character pool. They've added a toast notification when an agitator appears in the player's country, and exiled characters now send a notification to all diplomatically relevant countries that they've been exiled. The list of changes goes on. It's largely, like I say, sort of small things that will make a difference where they're implemented, but ultimately not really going to change Victoria 3 all that much. As far as balance changes go, again, it's sort of things around the edges. You might notice these a little bit more though. They've reduced demand for fine art among richer populations and increased their demand for services, for example. Also of note, the industry banned law, a new, slightly more radical one, has been improved. Halved tech penalties and made them exclusive to production technology. It's also added 50% private construction allocation and added 10% agriculture throughput in all states, with a minus 10% expected SOL for all POPs. So that law's been finessed quite a bit, and obviously overall, it's a buff for that one. And I think that sort of signifies most of the balance changes that you can see here. On performance, as we've already talked about, they've added a way for us to essentially consolidate small groups of populations within to larger groups as the game progresses to try and help with late game processing and late game performance. They also note here that they've optimized some building particles, they've scaled pop consolidation parameters as we've discussed, and added a game rule to let us control the degree of that pop consolidation. Otherwise, not really much to report around performance. I think that the late game performance continues to be problematic. Maybe these changes will help ease that. The changes to modding, as you can see, and I'm really not an expert on this one, so I'd be speaking completely out of turn if I pretended like I've understood them, but they seem to have opened up a little bit, as we've already discussed. For example, journal entries now support modifiers, which propagate to their countries while active. They've also added prefers_law trigger, which returns if a character or interest group prefers one law over another. Interest groups can now be given unique traits per country, both at startup and during play, using a new effect. And the changed list goes on. Hopefully, valid improvements for the modding community, a community that has produced some really impressive stuff while I've been covering Victoria 3. I've had the privilege of playing a little bit of it anyway, and man, it's the modding across the board, actually, the modding communities and these kinds of strategy games consistently impress me. Anyway, moving along from that tangent, the final thing that they've got on their list is bug fixes, and as you can imagine, there are quite a few of them. Not really worth delving into the detail here. You can check them out fully in the patch notes linked below. The Voice of the People content also received some updates, as I mentioned in the introduction, and I think that they're worth discussing. They could almost be more significant than a lot of the free ones, actually. Let's start off with talk around how they're going to change journal entries based on feedback that they've received, or the actual sort of historical content, and that's where they've focused their efforts here clearly. For example, the divided monarchy decision now has a really clear pathway for who you're going to support. Do you like the Orleanists? Then you can directly click and encourage them. And they lean into this a little bit more with some detail below. So instead of having the old timer like they used to have, which would basically just time us to install a candidate, we now select our preferred candidate, of course, and this gives us the option to sway characters to support the dynasty, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the dynasty who we support will be enthroned once the entry is completed. And there are a variety of factors that go into it. What kinds of thing, you might ask? Well, thankfully we have the answer. Popularity of the character is one factor, and you'll see events leading into this too. It's not limited to just interest group characters. The ruler, heir, generals, admirals, and agitators can all impact the rate. Furthermore, all of these can be swayed to your cause, and the cooldown for the sway action has been reduced down to 2 years from 5 as well, to give us more options to do so. Agitators tend to have a lot of popularity. Finding one you can invite and bribe into agitating for your candidate can help your cause a lot as well, or you could send a general into war to win battles for you in order to help the cause. Clout of interest groups is also very important by the people leading or sort of appropriating the ideology, and it's multiplied if you can somehow maneuver the interest group into government. Building levels as well of particular type are major aspects. Bonapartists, for example, gain progress from military buildings, others industrial or agricultural. If you feel forced to increase France's military readiness, it will tend to favor the Bonapartist cause. And that's of course pretty important, because it will not only direct the decisions that you've already made and who you've decided to support, but also direct your future development and how you choose to grow and expand. They say, I found out the hard way that this includes conscription centers. Once your conscripts are fully raised, and for as long as the war is raging, the Bonapartists will hold a lot of sway over France. And outside of the journal entries, the last thing is government legitimacy. For the house currently enthroned, positive legitimacy, 50 or above, will increase the rate of progress while it will decrease it to a lesser extent for the others. It doesn't only apply to the House of the Orleans necessarily, because if France were to abolish the monarchy and re-establish it, a different house may sit the throne, and the divided monarchy regional entry could re-emerge. And of course, the decisions that we make in the journal entries themselves will also matter, and there are plenty of those, at least in the limited experience that I have playing on the beta version of this update, which, as a gentle and friendly reminder, is already live in the Steam Properties tab. And if you're watching this video after Monday the 26th of June, then you don't need to worry about that, because the full patch has already been released. And of course, with this massive change to this journal entry that really does guide at least one of the main branches of how you might play the historical flavor content, you can fail the divided monarchy entry as well. It'll happen if there's an interest group in France that supports a presidential republic, push it through if turmoil in the capital is high enough, or if one of the following is true. France is experiencing the springtime of the peoples, France has more than 25% radicals, or a civil war is about to break out. This will impose a provisional government on France, changing from a presidential republic to appointed bureaucrats, exiling the monarch and making the leader of an interest group that supports republicanism the president, and calling an election. So a lot will take place. But of course, if France restores monarchy, then the question will re-emerge and the entry will come back. And much like with the free update, there are also some broader headline categories with changes. As you can see in improvements, of course, there's the rework to the divided monarchist, which we've discussed in great detail. There's also a decision for France to purchase Luxembourg. And after France declares its natural borders, nations in the warpath receive an event warning them of French aggression and adding a conscription modifier to them, giving them a slight way to bolster their strength against an aggressive France. Successful coups now cancel a law being enacted if they do not prefer it to the current one. And a socialist revolution in France will lead to a commune, which starts a council republic. They've also adjusted the cement the rightful dynasty journal entry to require maintaining legitimacy as said dynasty, and a few other things as well around French players to sway any character other than rulers or heirs. Nice. Players receiving relevant information around Indochina events, and enacting monarchy as a republic in France will prompt the player to choose a historical candidate. And that sort of rounds out the overall improvements. Of course, there are other smaller categories. Let's quickly take a look through those. The interface changes largely suit things that we've already discussed. And to round out the video, you have balance, AI, and of course, bug fix changes. The balance and AI improvements are almost one and the same in that the AI changes are adjusting how the French AI uses default strategies. The weighting put towards, say, the Bonapartists, for example, legitimists having additional weighting to befriend Spain, France more likely to demand relevant Algerian territory. It's around how the AI will behave and the decisions that it will make. And the balance improvements kind of change that as well. And indeed, we've talked about many of them already, like reducing the sway to dynastic ideology cooldown, being reduced from 5 to 2 years. And the bug fixes, thank a Lord for the bug fixes, are also here as well. And that concludes today's video, looking at the patch, which, as I've mentioned at the start of the video, is available right now on the Steam Workshop in a beta version, and will be available for full free release, the version 1.3.5, on Monday, the 26th of June. We'll be back for one more coverage, one more update video of Dev Diaries next week before a small break. Thank you for joining me, everybody. I'll see you next time.